everyone, I am back to doing the Star Wars book reviews. It's been a while since I've done one of these. The last one I did was back in December, which coincided with my review of Rise of Skywalker, which may have been fun for you watching it. It was not fun for me, and unfortunately my Star Wars book reviews kind of went out on a sour note, which is not what I wanted, but I'm glad to be back to doing them now. This will not be a monthly thing. This is it'll be done when it's done thing, whenever I find the time to read and do the review. So there's no regular appearances. They're just going to come out when they come out, and that's pretty much it. I don't want to sound like Linkara when I say that, which is even funnier because I'm going to be covering a comic book today. But yeah, I'm going to be back to doing the Star Wars book reviews because there are a few more that I wanted to do. And today's in particular is one that I've wanted to do since I started doing the Star Wars book reviews. It's one that I've wanted to talk about for a long time. And when I first put this, when I started to put this series together, I had a list of ones that I absolutely knew I wanted to review. The Thrawn trilogy, Shadows of the Empire, Dark Empire, the New Jedi Order series, the X-Wing series. I had a short list of the ones I knew I absolutely wanted to do. And today's entry, the Crimson Empire saga, which was published by Dark Horse Comics, began in 1997, and it's one that I'm quite nostalgic for, was one that I've always wanted to review, but to review it, I would have had to go back and reread it, and in the cases of Crimson Empires 2 and 3, I would have had to read it for the first time, and it was just something that it just kept falling by the wayside, and I just couldn't get it reviewed until now. It's funny the things that you get time for when you've been stuck inside for over 3 months. So I've read it, reviewed it. This review was actually going to come out last month, but I opted to do the Clone Wars, the final season of Clone Wars on Disney+. I decided to review that instead and put it off yet another month. But here we are. I'm finally getting the review out to you guys, and I am very excited to talk about this one. Crimson Empire is, my kind of relationship with this one is a little different than Dark Empire. Dark Empire is one that I knew about, and is one that got referenced a lot in other Star Wars media, so I was always aware of it. Like, I mentioned it in the review. Reading these books, and you hear, oh yeah, that time that Luke Skywalker went to the dark side and joined up with a clone of the Emperor. I'm like, wait, when did that happen? What are you talking about? But Dark Empire is not one that I'm necessarily nostalgic for. It's just one that I was always aware of, which isn't necessarily the same thing. I never actually read it until years and years later. Crimson Empire, on the other hand, is way more to my liking, way more interesting, and is one that I definitely read at the time it was out. Crimson Empire 1, I definitely did. Crimson Empire 2 and 3, didn't read until this recent preparation for the review. But I'll talk about that when I get to those two. But in the case of Crimson Empire, that was a series that instantly captured my imagination right off the bat, and I knew I wanted to read it when I first saw the advertisement for it in one of the magazines. I think it was because I used to have a subscription to the Star Wars magazine, Star Wars Insider, I think it was called, and I think I saw an ad for it, and I was like, I want to read that. That looks awesome. And to me, the concept, the premise of this comic book story, to me, captures what made the expanded universe so great in the first place. And I know I've talked about this before when I talk about the bounty hunters and all the creatures and aliens and Jabba's palace and Mos Eisley and all these other things. But one of the greatest aspects of the original trilogy, and something that, in my opinion, the prequel trilogy wasn't entirely able to recapture and the sequel trilogy wasn't entirely able to recapture, was the idea that you have all these different characters and all these different aliens and monsters and, you know, all these other side characters that are just filling up the background. And but they look interesting and they catch your eye and you're like, what is that dude's story? And what's that dude's story? It's not important to the plot of the movie that you know who these people are. It's, they're there to fill out the world and make the world look more organic. But us dorky super fans, we look at them and go, it's like, God, I wonder what that person's deal is. Boba Fett and the Bounty Hunters are probably the ultimate example of this. You know, and when I did my reviews of Tales of Jabba's Palace and things like that, very similar. It was like, oh, now we get to know like what their names are and what their backstories are and what put them in that scene, how they got to be in that one scene in the movie that they were probably in for only 10 seconds. if that. And that was what the expanded universe provided. It provided us answers to the questions that us dorks had about the side characters that looked interesting, but didn't necessarily factor into the greater story of the original movies. And like I said, that's something that the prequels and the sequels never quite recaptured. The prequels, some of the Jedi, maybe, like Kit Fisto, kind of had an appeal to them. And the sequel trilogy, maybe a couple one-off characters, the Traitor Trooper in Force Awakens, but other than that, not a whole lot going for it, where you look at the characters and go, dude, I wonder what that dude's story is. Nothing really jumps out at me as I'm thinking about it. Again, maybe a handful of characters, but not like the Mos Eisley Cantina, where literally every character in the scene you want to know more about, because they all look so interesting. And that was what the expanded universe definitely provided. And one of the best examples of characters that looked awesome, but were not important to the plot, they were just there to fill out the background, and you could have removed them from the movie and it wouldn't have meant anything. It probably wouldn't have changed that much, but they did add to the look and aesthetic of the film, and they looked awesome, and we wanted to know more about these guys. And that is the Imperial Royal Guards, the Emperor's Red Guards, who look awesome in Return of the Jedi, but ultimately don't do anything. They're just there to look cool and to be the Emperor's Guards. That's literally all they do. There is a deleted scene where they turn their weapons on Darth Vader as he force chokes one of the high-ranking Imperial officials, but that's a deleted scene, and only us dorks have seen it. You can find the clip on YouTube, but again, they don't really do anything. They just pull their weapons up on Darth Vader, and that's pretty much it. But the Imperial Guards looked awesome, and again, the full red cloak, they look like almost like walking crayons in a way. Actually, Robot Chicken had a joke where the Emperor called one of them Crayola or something like that. So. But there's they were instantly visually interesting. So, and when you watch The Last Jedi and you see the Praetorian Guards for Snoke, they were clearly based off of those old Imperial guard designs. And Crimson Empire presents us an opportunity to show us at least a couple of the characters underneath the masks. What were they really like? What was their training like? How loyal were they to the Emperor? And what we get here is part of the fallout of Return of the Jedi. More so, it's actually more the fallout of Dark Empire after the fall of the clone emperors and all of that. We get a story that focuses on two former Imperial guards. One who is a fugitive from what's left of the Empire and is on the run and is out for revenge against those that wronged him. And another who's trying to assume power in the power vacuum left behind by the Emperor and trying to take over the Empire for himself. The main protagonist of Crimson Empire, the entire saga, not just Crimson Empire 1, is one Kir Kanos, a former Royal Imperial Guard who is really the last of his kind. It's revealed that shortly after the fall of the Emperor, all of the Royal Imperial Guards were killed off by what was left of the Imperial forces, led by Karnor Jax, who is the main antagonist of the story and is revealed to be a former Imperial Guard himself, and is slowly trying to become the next Darth Vader and even Emperor. He's picking up Sith abilities and is learning the ways of the dark side of the Force, and actually secretly planned to overthrow the Emperor until the Emperor fell and pretty much forced him to put his plans into motion right away. And one of the first things he did was made sure that the Imperial Royal Guard, who are trained to be insanely loyal to the Emperor, he wanted to make sure that they were all eliminated, because he's really like the one rogue Imperial Guard who wasn't really that loyal to him. And Kir Kanos is the only one that survived the Purge, which is interesting. This actually predates Revenge of the Sith and the whole Jedi Purge thing. And it makes me wonder if this comic was kind of an inspiration for that, as the Royal Imperial Guards are all hunted down and killed, and there's only one survivor left. So it's kind of interesting how this kind of mirrors like the fall of the Jedi, and kind of like there's one left that's got to carry the baton to get revenge for his people. I'm sure it was intentional, but again, it is very interesting. And through the course, we get all these flashbacks of the training that the Imperial Guards went through, and there's even a rather brutal practice session with Darth Vader that's pretty interesting. And again, we get to find out more about the guards and what their life is like. And it's like, oh man, they are programmed to be absolutely slavishly loyal to the Emperor and have to be like the best fighters ever to serve as his bodyguards, which makes perfect sense. And I feel like those are things that we probably assumed on our own. Again, Boba Fett's reputation of being the most dangerous bounty hunter in the galaxy largely comes from the fact that Darth Vader pointed in his face and said no disintegrations. And we all just kind of took the baton and went from there. And all the writers took it even further than anything our imaginations could come up with. And that's kind of the same thing going here. It's like, yeah, we all probably thought, it's like, oh yeah, these are like the best fighters in the universe. And they're like supremely loyal to the Emperor because they'd have to be. And so it was nice to see that kind of spelled out in comic book form and get visual representation of all the things that we kind of assumed were true. And throughout the course of the story, Kyrkanos actually finds himself not only being hunted down by what's left of the Empire, but also allying himself with the rebels, who he also blames for killing the Emperor, who he is still really loyal to. Mirath Sin is the main rebel that we spend time with throughout the course of the entire Crimson Empire saga. She eventually serves as a love interest to Kyrkanos and kind of I guess Kanos is like the ultimate project. It's like, gotta fix the guy. And their romance buds throughout the course of the three stories, the three separate story arcs. But here it's a little bit more contentious because Kyrkanos doesn't subscribe to the New Republic or the Rebellion and their ideals. He's still loyal to the Emperor and wants to get revenge on those responsible for causing the fall of the Empire. And he blames Karnor Jax for that, not only for the fall of the Imperial Guards, but also wants to call him out for his disloyalty to Emperor Palpatine. And I guess now I'll talk about Karnor Jax in a little bit more detail. He, like I said, he wants to become like the next Darth Vader. If you look at his costume, it's basically a Royal Imperial Guard outfit, but it's black. And it's like, yeah, this guy wants to be the next Darth Vader. And the fact that he's picking up Sith abilities and he's trying to learn about the Force to enhance his own power, it's like, yeah, this guy, he really wants to be like the numero uno supreme guy in the universe. And Kyrkanos wants to kill him and bring him down and get revenge for his fallen master, the Emperor. This ultimately concludes this exciting story arc, which is my personal favorite, even after all these years. It's my personal favorite of the Dark Horse Comics Star Wars entries that they did. That's true. I put it above Dark Empire, and I put it above Crimson Empires 2 and 3, which I'm going to talk about later in this video. Because I really bought into the rivalry between Kyrkanos and Karnor Jax, and that was what was interesting to me. And the entire story arc was just about, it's got to conclude with them coming to a head and having an epic fight. When you get to that epic fight, it really is a major, major comic book highlight in Star Wars canon. I highly recommend checking out Crimson Empire just for that fight between Karnor Jax and Kyrkanos. I'm sorry. And the climactic battle ends with Kanos getting the best of Karnor Jax, and he's getting ready to kill him when Mirath Sin tells him, no, don't kill him, we need him, he has valuable information that the Republic can use to bring down what's left of the Empire. And Kanos is like, I don't really care about what you're doing, I'm gonna kill this guy, because that's what I sought out to do. Very Clint Eastwood of him, very, kind of that old school, kind of unbreakable type of character that you would expect to see in a spaghetti western. So he kills Kyrkanos, and he also kills one of the top-ranking rebels working for Mirath Sin. And so the story ends with him, you think he's going to redeem himself and ultimately join up with the Republic, which doesn't happen initially. And so it ends with him getting his revenge, but the rest of the Empire is still hunting him down, so he has to go on the run. And Mirath Sin is mad at him for doing what he did, and now she wants to kill him. So it opens the door for more stories to tell, although I don't think 2 and 3 are quite as good as 1. I think 1, mainly for the focus on the rivalry between Kyrkanos and Karnor Jax, and setting that up and explaining that backstory and giving us additional details on these very mysterious figures in Star Wars canon, all made that very, very interesting. But the way it ends, it's like, yeah, they could tell more stories with this, absolutely. And actually, included in the comics, which I got, I actually read on my Kindle, So there's another plug for Amazon Kindle. Get one of those, and you can, go on Amazon and pick up the Crimson Empire Saga. You can get it in one purchase, and go ahead and read that, because that's what I did. And I highly recommend it. It's great. And but the complete saga also includes a few one-off comics that I'm not going to bother going to too much detail about, but because they're all just kind of like, they're fine for what they are, but they're basically just a bunch of one-offs that kind of set the stage for the next story arc more than anything else. But we find out that Kyrkanos has taken on the life of a bounty hunter, and that's how he's hiding. And he's assumed the name of, let me make sure I got this right, Kilcanix. So he goes from Kyrkanor to Kilcanix. And it's like, that sounds a little too similar to your real name. But then again, if Obi-Wan Kenobi can go by Ben Kenobi on Tatooine, who am I to judge in this world? But anyway, before I get into the other two story arcs, I just want to sum up part one by saying part one is one that I am very, very nostalgic for. Not quite on par with like the Thrawn trilogy as far as my undying, unhealthy love of it, but pretty close. And especially in the world of Star Wars comics. To me at the time, there was nothing better in the world of Star Wars comics. It's like, you all can have Dark Empire. This is where it's at. And that's my opinion. But Crimson Empire 1 gets a huge thumbs up for me. I highly recommend checking it out. Gets an A+. And if you read the entire saga, I don't think you'll regret it, but I think it peaks with that first story arc. That first story arc was really where it's at. The Adventures of Kyrkanos continues in Crimson Empire 2, Council of Blood. And this is, I would consider, a worthy sequel to Crimson Empire. It's not as good. I think the main thing that made Crimson Empire 1 work so well was the rivalry and the build-up to the fight between Kyrkanos and Kanor Jax. And unfortunately, the antagonist this time around isn't as good, but I think it is a worthy follow-up in the sense that it continues... it presents events that feel like a natural follow-up to what happened in Crimson Empire 1. What happens here is that we find out that the Empire, or what's left of it, is run by a council, and Kyrkanos wants to hunt them all down and kill them. But he's still in hiding as a bounty hunter, working for a Hutt, because of course all bounty hunters work for Hutts, this one being Grappa the Hutt. And Mirith Sin is hot on the trail of the Hutts and Kyrkanos, and they get tied in with the Imperial Council, and there's a big conspiracy going on, and so it's like this interwoven web of a bunch of different characters and a bunch of different things going on, and it leads to an exciting, explosive climax. The crux of the entire thing, I think, like the main body of Crimson Empire 2, is the growing relationship between Kyrkanos and Mirith Sin and their romance and everything. I will take this time to point out with Mirith Sin, if you look at her, she looks a lot like Mara Jade, and I don't know if that, I mean, she's got the red hair and the same kind of figure and everything. Different character, maybe the same temperament, but different character for sure. Different backstory and everything. Actually, Kyrkanos' backstory is closer to that of Mara Jade, if you think about it. Maybe they just took Luke and Mara and just kind of gender flipped it for this. I don't know, but I would have liked for her to have a different design, because at times while I was reading it, I was like, she looks a lot like Mara Jade. I wish they could have gotten away from that a little bit, but yeah, it's them coming to an understanding and Kyrkanos slowly softening up over time is good to see. He can't just be a complete stoic, loyal to the old ways type of guy. He actually does grow, change, and evolve over the course of the story. We see them actually deal with this alien race of cannibals and kind of like religious zealot, crazy types that, what are they called? I had the note, the Xanabars. And they actually look a lot like Mr. Meeseeks for you Rick and Morty fans out there, which I got a big laugh out of. It's like they predicted Rick and Morty like 20 some odd years before that even came out. So that was interesting, but yeah, it's them there's a long period where they are trapped by themselves on the run, trying to get away from the people that are hunting them down. And that's where a lot of the bonding takes place. And she tries to kind of, again, women love a project. And she was trying to win Kyrkanos over to the rebellion and the New Republic and all of that other stuff. And the better life that's out there for him. And very interestingly to me, the Imperial Council ends up being headed by kind of a puppet. What was his name? Xandel Caravis. Goddamn, the names in Star Wars Expanded Universe are just, they're a mouthful, to say the least. The best line I ever heard is when somebody said that they look like anagrams. And it's like, yeah, they kind of do. But yeah, Zandel Caravis is basically a puppet who's put in charge of the council. And we learn that a lot of the moves that the Imperial Council is making, and Zandel himself, is in direct contact with the real puppet master of the whole thing. And this made my eyes bug out when I read it. Nom Anor. And immediately I was like, I know that name. And sure enough, it is the same Nom Anor that is with the Yuuzhan Vong. And this story was released before the Yuuzhan Vong invasion and the events of the New Jedi Order series, which I reviewed on this channel. And it turns out that this story was kind of like foreshadowing the events of that huge story arc. So that was very interesting, little bit of foresight there. The New Jedi Order series didn't take place in the comics. I believe it was originally supposed to be, and something happened with the publisher, and it just wound up in the hands of Del Rey, and they took the ball and ran with it. But in any case, they were foreshadowing the events of one of the largest story arcs ever done in all of Star Wars. So that was interesting to kind of see that being set up, and it was really cool to see Nom Anor as like this puppet master pulling strings and trying to, as it turns out, trying to destroy what was left of the Empire to make room for the Yuuzhan Vong invasion that would happen in just a few short years. And yeah, that's really all I have to say about Crimson Empire 2. It's a worthy continuation, not as good as Part 1, but the artwork is still very good. The characters are still enjoyable. Again, Kir Kanos is a worthy protagonist for stories like this. And there's some nice exploration of the universe, and there's a lot of, like I said, everything feels like this interwoven web. And to have Nom Anor is kind of like the spider that's kind of guiding everything where it's supposed to be and setting the stage for much bigger events down the road. That's all very interesting to see. And again, reading this for the first time, my eyes like bugged out when I saw that name, and it really when you've read the New Jedi Order series, that adds a little bit more extra context to this and what's going on here. So, yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was good. Okay, and let's finish up with Crimson Empire 3, Empire Lost, the conclusion to the Crimson Empire saga, and was published long after Crimson Empire 2. Crimson Empire 2 basically wrapped up before the year 2000, and it was a long time before 3 was greenlit and ultimately published. So it took a long time to get this third part. Even though it had been planned for a really long time. And I don't know if it was that time off that kind of threw everything out of whack, but this one's not quite as good as the rest, unfortunately. The artwork is not as good, and I'm no comic genius by any stretch of the imagination, but there were times where the artwork was extremely wonky. Just as an example, there were parts where Jaina Solo, as a kid, was focused on as part of the story. To give you an idea of where this takes place in the timeline. And there were times where she looked like an adult, and it was really strange. And I was like, but she's supposed to be a kid, but she looks like an adult. It just, and I don't mean like in her face, it looked like an adult. It was very weird how it was drawn. And there's other parts with Luke Skywalker in it where they say he's Luke, but he looks like Han, and other weird examples like that where the look of the different characters just feels very off at times. And the story itself, unfortunately, doesn't have a whole lot going for it. What happens? We have another power vacuum within the Empire. The Imperial Remnant, led by Grand Admiral Pelion, has basically signed a peace treaty with the Republic, and that part of the war is over. And then you have another Imperial warlord that's going to rise, take power, and try to bring the Empire back to its former glory. The Empire Reborn, and that character is Enix Devion. I forgot his name because he's really not that impressive, especially when you compare him to what we got in the previous installments of Crimson Empire with Kaynor Jax, who has a personal history with the protagonist and is trying to emulate Darth Vader and was once a Royal Imperial Guard and all these other things going on. And then you have Nom Anor as like the puppet master kind of guiding the Imperial Council in Crimson Empire 2, which sets the stage for bigger events in another story arc. And here you have just another in a long line of Imperial warlords trying to bring the Empire back to former glory, and it's just not very interesting, unfortunately. A lot of it feels like it's treading water. Kirkanos and Mirith Sin. Their relationship doesn't necessarily evolve too far past what we saw in Crimson Empire 2, not to a degree that's satisfying anyway. Mirith Sin, they did something interesting with her where they made her head of security on Coruscant. I thought that was an interesting, it's like, oh, what's she up to these days? Like, oh, she's got like a really important gig, and it's like, that's kind of neat. But other than that, not a whole lot of intrigue here. And everything else just kind of falls into kind of a weird holding pattern. They tried to fluff this one up by including a ton of different characters, both from the original trilogy and from the expanded universe. Like I said, Princess Leia shows up, the Solo twins show up, Luke shows up, Boba Fett shows up at one point, Pelion shows up. So it's like they really tried to load this with a bunch of characters, kind of distract you from the fact that the story wasn't very interesting. And the story kind of treads water and kind of repeats a bunch of things that we've already seen before in better stories, quite honestly. I'm not saying it's terrible. It's not one of the worst things I've ever read. And it doesn't necessarily harm the previous installments of Crimson Empire, at least not for me. Crimson Empire 1 is a classic, and I highly recommend it. Crimson Empire 2 is a worthy successor. Crimson Empire 3 doesn't really damage anything. It just kind of feels like, after such a long wait for a sequel, it just kind of, it's probably a letdown. And, I didn't feel the wait because I never read part 2 and I never read part 3 until it was time to prep for this review. So that didn't really impact me, but I think a lot of other people who probably waited a really long time for Crimson Empire 3 were disappointed by the final result. So it's got some, it's got some fun elements in it. Like I said, Boba Fett adds a little something. I'll always mark out for Pelion. He's one of my favorite characters in the expanded universe. And Kirkanos is still a fun character to follow and it's still a fun character to focus on. So there's enough like shiny objects to keep you distracted from being completely bored with it, but it's still not, if you're reading the entire saga, read it for completion's sake. But if you're satisfied with how 2 ended or even how 1 ended, you can pretty much just stop. Crimson Empire 3, not a must-read by any stretch of the imagination. But overall, probably could have ended the Crimson Empire saga in a better way, but as is. The way I would sum it up is that like I said, Crimson Empire 1 is a classic and one of my favorite pieces of expanded universe material that I read in my youth. And rereading it, it kind of reaffirmed that. It's like, oh yeah, this brings back so many great memories here. And the rest of it kind of felt like it was just released it was trying to kind of recapture the magic of that original story arc, and nothing ever quite matched up to it. And 3 kind of felt like the last gasp of trying to match something that was so successful originally, at least creatively successful. I don't know how well. I assume the comic sold well if they kept releasing follow-ups to it. But as is, I highly recommend Crimson Empire 1. And the rest of it, if you're interested in following the characters for a little bit more, go ahead and read it. But it's not a must-read. That's pretty much my take on the entire thing. So I've concluded this review, and I am back to doing Star Wars book reviews. But like I said at the beginning, this isn't going to be a regular once-a-month thing. It'll be done when it's done thing. So I can't promise any kind of set schedule. And I will, however, say that the next thing I'm going to start reviewing is another one that I've wanted to do from the very beginning, and I finally got the chance to start. I have not started reading them yet. So again, it might be a while before the review comes out. But one that I read quite extensively when I was younger, and it's one that was very popular among my age group and my group of friends when they came out back in the 90s, and that is the Young Jedi Knight series, which focused heavily on Jason and Jaina Solo and their growing adventures into becoming Jedi Knights. And they're young adult style books, so it'll be a slightly different perspective. And getting to reread those is going to be very interesting. Hopefully they hold up better than the Jedi Prince series. hopefully they hold up better than that. But I remember them being better than that. Like even back then, I remember the Jedi Prince series being kind of goofy. So, but we'll see how that goes. It'll be very interesting. So whenever I get around to reading and finishing those stories, you can expect those reviews to pop up. I can't promise when they'll show up though. They'll be around when I get around to it, and that's just how it is for right now. But that is all I have for you in this video. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. It feels good to get back into the swing of things with Star Wars. I took a break there for a while. Rise of Skywalker disappointed me, and I think Clone Wars kind of got me bit by the Star Wars bug again, and now it's time to get back into reviewing stuff. So I will have more for you later. I just can't say when that will be. So be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon so you get notified when I post new videos, both Star Wars related and not Star Wars related. Haven't done a wrestling video. I should probably do something about current events of wrestling, but there's just nothing going on right now that's interesting me. So it's the state of things right now. But yeah, you can also follow me on Twitter. The link is in the description. So that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I'll see you all later.